Hello, evening. So the Telegram channel has guilt tripped me into doing a stream because I haven't done one for ages. And yeah, I've just been quite knackered recently. I think coming into winter always gets me a bit. Um, I'm slightly concerned because my stream's saying audio bitrate of 0, but it's only a suggestion. But I don't know if that means I have no sound. Um, so I'm hoping somebody can come on and tell me if there's sound or not. But we'll see, I guess. My microphone's very high. I'll turn that down very slightly. Um, yeah, anyway, so I've been having a bit of break this weekend because of being exhausted. So I haven't done much on the lower time frames compared to what I've already shared in the Telegram channels previously. Um, so I'll just do a quick overview of the higher time frame, what I've talked about previously and what I was kind of looking for, and also how I've changed my mind to some extent now. I don't like it when everybody else wants to do the same thing as me. I'm just going to jump in my channel and ask if somebody can check the stream. Can check whether people can hear me. Um, yeah, just so I can be sure. But I'm not talking to myself because I'll try and do a short stream and it'll end up being an hour and a half like it normally is. But yeah, I certainly don't want to be talking to myself for an hour only to find out that the volume isn't working or something. Yeah, so anyway, I'll start and then just hope somebody comes on and tells me it's okay. Um, okay, so what I was looking for, you may remember on this previous drop or what I was looking at was a lot of confluence with this 2021 top. And I'd brush. This obviously was a much more extended top, so I was basically seeing this double top as this. So obviously this is much more extended, whereas that's much more of a clean double top. What the reason I was looking at similarities is this move here was a lot resembling that move. Then not so much this top. Obviously, this top was more extended, the second top. However, there was a lot of confluence with things I wanted and things I saw back in 2021. Oh, good. I have somebody saying they can hear me. Great. Thanks. I'm typing great, thanks, but I could probably just say it verbally. Okay, all good. Thank you for confirming you can hear me. Yeah, so obviously this top, this top looked very different to the previous top. However, there were some things that happened here that happened back in 2021, such as MicroStrategy, the structure, I won't go into it now, but if you compare the MicroStrategy top from 2021 and to what MicroStrategy's topped out at, how it's topped out this time, that was aligning with when this was in this area. Similarly, the other thing we had in 2021 was that in the first, it was again slightly different, but I think in this first little top that we had here, MicroStrategy didn't MicroStrategy Korea didn't take out this high, the all-time high at that point, and it took a bit more time for Korea to take out the all-time high as well. And that's basically exactly what we had here. That Korea just took a little bit longer. I can't show you that here at least. So to take out, yeah. So the top that we had here. Obviously, Bitcoin US dollar took it out immediately after and then messed around above for a while. Korea actually had taken it out there and then we just did that final pump. Similarly, we had things like the dollar not hitting support, etc., etc. So those similarities were why I was looking for this to top out here. So obviously we've got that. That was nice. The second thing I later said is that while we had support here, and I think that that was the monthly demand at that area. Again, here we had this bounce, and then price came back right to the start of this final up move. So one of the things I was saying was that while I would watch this orange area, sorry, this is before I drew the black line, in fact, that while I had that as a green area of a possible, that was my first possible long entry, and then this was my second possible long entry, what's remained green below. I then saw that so many people were wanting to long the 93k area, and I just don't like it if everybody's wanting to long the same area. So I then changed that to orange. I said I didn't want to completely discount it because it was the top of this 3-month zone, and obviously you never know that, you know, even if it does fail, ultimately you could get a decent bounce off it in the interim. However, I then said I was a lot more wary about that because a few too many people were looking at the same thing. So that was obviously a wise move. Now we see it later, you know, it's come down into this green area and in fact took a big wick through. There was a massive Bybit liquidation that happened on this last drop. So I think it was trying to hold. It would have tried to hold there. But then there was a huge Bybit liquidation that came in that pushed it lower before it bounced back up again. The other thing, and on that basis, and this black line, so this is just reiterating some of the previous analysis so you can see how I do it and the things I'm looking at. But so the black line again was from this point in time, or as we were dropping here, again, a lot of people were looking to long here, and it was a possible area, and obviously that half the market looks for swing failures, so they would have been probably waiting for that low to be taken out, but I could see a lot of people starting to long in here. And I had a sense that it wasn't even going to make it back up to weekly supply. And again, that was based on what we had in 2021. So if I go back over there. So that was this point in time. And it was very similar that we had this big wick down and this bounce, but the price didn't come back up to weekly supply. So one of the comments I'd made in the group was 98 to 100k. I expected the bounce, then I expected probably a fairly feeble bounce that didn't make it up to supply, and that was when I drew this black line, but then was going to drop and potentially drop right through that orange circle. So this black line played out pretty nicely ultimately. So now I can hide that because I've celebrated my own success there. Yeah, so then the other thing, and now, okay, so now what I have seen also is that a lot of people are now comparing to 2021. So in the same way that here I said, okay, a lot of people want to long here, I'm now seeing a lot of people. So I had this channel drawn in, again, back to 2021, on the basis that that was a very similar structure to what we had here. When we finally hit that bottom, we started bouncing around. We had this rising channel type thing going on here, so I drew similar here. However, again, I'm now seeing a lot of other people draw similar. And I'm seeing a bit of a mix, actually. You know, some people are saying, you know, this is just going to go back to the moon, and other people are saying we're going to 70k or 0. So we're getting a real mix of what people are thinking at this point. I just don't really want to make a judgment. So again, to reiterate my bigger picture things, we're in a big 3-month demand here. So just show you that. So we've hit 3-month demand. It's not the nicest. We didn't have a significant move above. It didn't go to make a significant high. However, it is a 3-month demand, so therefore I don't want to aggressively short against it. That's not to say if I won't short if I see scalps and things like that, but generally I don't want to aggressively short against something like that because it's still in an uptrend. We haven't taken out that low at 74k. Even if we did take out a low with a wick into the 3-month below, which also hasn't quite been tested, then that could still run higher. Yeah, so basically still obviously in an uptrend. I have had some other observations, however. So on the bear side, 3-month demand, on the bull side, 3-month demand structure is up and higher low. On the bear side, we have made a monthly supply. So again, that doesn't mean we're not going to go straight back through it. It has happened before. You know, we've got structures. You can see structure here. It had a monthly supply. It did reject off it and came lower, but then went back and took it out immediately. Here we made weaker monthly supply. This red candle closed below that green one. It was a bit of a choppy one, and it just went straight back through it. I think it had a minor rejection at the level. Here again, closed below, made a weak monthly supply, just went straight back up through it. So it's quite capable of going straight back up through it if it wants, particularly coming off a 3-month demand. However, those are areas that I would be looking for shorts, monthly supply, and then lower time frames. There's weekly and 5-day, and it's very choppy and messy, but there's weekly and 5-day, etc. I'm going to move over to my other chart so when I was looking the other day, the other thing is here. So we've broken this, just a few things on the trend lines. We've broken this long, big dark brown trend line coming all the way from the bottom in 2022. We have had a break of that. We could just back test that. We're back testing it now. I don't like trend lines, not something I trade in isolation, but just be aware of that. We broke this shorter term trend line, which runs from just the bottom in October 2023. We broke that at the top. However, if you look at the linear scale, just about see it there, that trend line, we're still holding that as support. So again, also a reason I don't like trend lines. I think they're very subjective. I see people, always draw them on the wicks. The only thing I will sometimes do is if we've got a wick and then a stop hunt to a wick like here, sometimes I draw trend lines, for example, like that, where I ignore the stop hunting wick. But for the most part, I just draw right on the top of the wicks because I don't really understand any logic for the bodies, because I think you can do, if you look at the monthly or the weekly, the body's going to be in a different place. And I think that's becomes even more subjective. So yeah, anyway, that's just a few things on the trend lines and what I'm looking at here for now. I'm just going to move over to my other chart so I can show you some other things. And the bulls won't like this at all. And you can also see here, so something weird happened on Coinbase this week. For some reason, I've lost, or in fact, since yesterday, I've lost the 2017-18 data. But it's showing on some time frames. I think it wasn't showing on the monthly, but was showing on the 3-weekly. So I'll just stick with the 3-weekly for now. So I don't know what's going on with that. But anyway, you can see the major trend line. I've topped out quite cleanly at that trend line. So again, it's always worth having them on your charts, just to see particularly if there's confluence with other areas. So when I was looking at this structure that we had here in 2021 and the possibility of a little rising channel that goes up to just about the next supply, which in this case is there's a 5-day, I think, and here is the first one. In this case, there's a 3-week and a weekly there. And I was mulling over the fact that that far too many people want to trade this. So I'm going to flip this to the log scale. What I did think was that that whole structure there is actually quite similar to this structure here. So I had a quick look at that. So this tiny structure here is what's overlaid. This whole thing overlaid here. Then I kind of thought, well, actually, this is kind of backwards. So like mostly I'm looking at past price action, seeing what happened afterwards, and then projecting what that might mean if a similar structure was to happen now. But in this case, I kind of thought, actually, that's the wrong way around, because this structure here has already kind of moved ahead, whereas the bigger structure hasn't. So I then thought, actually, what I should be doing is overlaying this over the whole chart. So that's what I came up with. So if this little structure here that we've had since the bottom in 2022 to what we did the top now is a smaller fractal of, in fact, the bigger picture, like I say, backwards to how we normally look at it, I see that these are actually pretty much quite similar. And everybody's going to hate that. And I commented, I shared it with somebody else. I shared it with the premium group anyway, but I shared it with somebody else yesterday as well. And then I actually thought twice about it, because I thought, so if this does happen, and if, now we're going to see this run all the way back down to perhaps the 3-month level there, or to around the 30K mark, what we're then going to have is this structure, this local structure, is then going to be bigger. And then if I was to then overlay, I mean, it just generally shows not good things if you're getting my point, that if that small structure runs back to the start of this structure, then basically what I'm saying is this whole structure runs back to the start of that structure, if that was to happen. Anyway, just wanted to share that with you because I think fractals do play out. Patterns don't always do the same things as previously, but fractals, the whole market is a massive fractal, and all the structures you see on the different time frames, and it's the same as exactly how I've described here. If you followed me, the detail that I shared on what we had in 2021, like yes, this is overextended compared to what 2021 did. We had, like I said a minute ago, we had this being the second top is a higher high, whereas this was a much clearer swing failure. So maybe that does change it dramatically. I like to look at these things so I can get a sense. The whole chart is a probability. So again, just if anyone's popped into the stream a bit late, don't freak out. This is a 3-month demand. From a supply-demand perspective, I am still bullish until I see the possibility of rejection on the monthly supply there, or any of the lower zones on the lower time frames. So that's what I'm actually trading. I am just conscious that these things can happen in the bigger picture. The other fractal I had before, I actually prefer that one I just showed, but the other fractal I had before was based on that double top, so you can observe. But so this fractal is from just taking this double top. I'm getting my brush. So it was just based on this double top here, and just overlaying that across the whole chart. And again, that doesn't show a particularly good picture of us going back to 3K. So like I say, don't freak out. We'll cross that bridge if we come to it. But I think you should always be conscious of all things. The other thing I always said, and in fact, I think I said it here because I think if I went to, maybe I go to the Bitstamp chart, and it's got a little more history. The other thing I find, it's not Bitstamp, this is Bitstamp. From the Elliotian perspective, the thing I find quite interesting is that we did have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and when people were doing Elliott waves, I never saw anybody saying A, B, C, which I don't know. Like, I don't know enough about Elliott waves, and I've again, anyone who follows me, I use Elliott waves only to the extent that I look for ABCs on the lower time frames, such that, so for example, here, if I know we've had an up movement, we've had an A, I expect this to be a B. And then I look for what the C, and this is the most, for me, this is the most high probability trade you can get, like the BC, both ends of the spectrum. And, it doesn't always work that easily. Like, so for example, here, and again, maybe this is my inexperience with Elliott waves, that, for example, if you had an A, if that was the A, B, C, with the first drop being the A, then we had an extended B, and then the bigger drop in the C. I don't necessarily find it that easy to judge, whether that was the A, B, C, or whether this is an A, and then maybe that's a B, or whether we were going to get a B rejection there, which I was looking for at the time, for a B, C. I'm exaggerating the C there. The C could still go into a triangle, but, and again, and similarly now that we have an A, B, and, sorry, this is the A, that's the B, and, is the C happening now? Similar to how we had the ABC here. There are all these factors, but I'm not an Elliott wave petition, but it always interested me that nobody ever considered that the 5 waves had already been done. And my other more bearish concern, I guess, is what I consider the weakness of this compared to those last up moves that we've had. So you see, we've had, we had massive strength on the first one. We had good strength on the second one. We had good strength on the third one. And then when I look at this one, I'm a bit like, meh. And, I know, again, from an Elliott wave perspective, that these are still impulses within, nothing has overlapped until now. So I guess on the lower time frames, that's fine. But from a perspective, when you look at how strong that is compared to how strong this is, I kind of think, I'm not overly convinced. So yeah, I don't love that, but again, cross that bridge when we come to it. So as I trade, as you know, I'm being asked, are we in wave 4? I'm not sure which is wave 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, wave 4, this being the down. Well, yes, that's again possible. So, if we ignored even the first beginning wave and we just said that's 1, 2, 3, I know that would be 4, and then this is 5. No, sorry, I don't see an a wave 4 really here, unless you're looking on the lower time frame, perhaps. But anyway, like I say, I'm not an expert, so I don't want to go into detail. There's all the sort of corrective waves and all those sorts of things. Like I say, for me, the biggest thing that I trade is just trying to trade the B wave, and particularly, and I tend to be short biased because I'm better at shorting, but so particularly for alts, when you see those alts with the massive moves up and then the first drop, then I'm instantly looking for where's that retest that I can look for a short, because those I think are the highest probability trades on the chart. They don't always work. Sometimes it will just keep going back through, but alts, particularly if you see those huge impulses, which would blow off tops, which those particularly taking out all-time high. There's quite a few of those lately. Those are where I'm looking for shorts. So anyway, that's the macro stuff that I'm looking at on Bitcoin. Then if we go back to the lower time frames, just so you can see, and I haven't changed this much, so that's why I didn't think I wanted to go into huge amounts of detail here, but because not much has changed since I last updated. So we're in this green zone. This was my area for like high time frame longs. So if you got in there, great. I still need things to consider. It could still go lower. Oh, one other thing I haven't covered actually. So my other big concern with the comparison to 2021, again, let me go back to one of the other charts because it's easier to see without all my stuff on it. So, and this was my concern about whether we were going to get those. So the lower time frame, whether we were going to get something, at a minimum, either we just get an up or at a minimum, some sort of decent corrective move of some size here. And the concern I had was that this in 2021 was on support. So we had, I think that's a monthly demand there or a 3-weekly demand, 3-weekly demand. So a little bit lower. So we had a 3-weekly demand here. This red candle, it came back, tested it, it went up, it struggled to make a new high. So the expectation then is that you're going to at least take out the lows of this 3-week and, that tested this 3-week and then possibly see the 3-week break. So when this came back here, you're not surprised to get a bit of a bounce off there. And then it's gone back seeking lower demand. And in this case, I think there's just a 3-day or something in here. It didn't get as low as I'd like. Bitcoin's prone to doing that, and there were for other reasons. We did take longs here at the 16K area because of that prospect of front running, and because of the fact that it at least tested this breakout area. The problem I have with where we are now is that we don't have the equivalent of this 3-week. So that when we had the test here, so this is the daily chart now. So when this tested, there's basically nothing. It didn't come back to the highs here, badly drawn line, but it didn't even quite test those. But there's basically no, so while we've, found support in inverted commas, there's basically no support here. So my concern then is that, the support was up there, and okay, if that was a deviation of it, then perhaps we would have held higher. But again, so we haven't even held this level here. It's come through that, so I don't really consider that a particular level anymore. Like I said, there are some differences, at least the difference here is while we may not have the support to the left that I would like here, this was decent support and was able to make a better higher high. It's not massively significant when you look at the monthly chart, but it did make a better higher high. So again, yes, and we have the bigger 3 months. So there are some things that, okay, we could go up from here. But when comparing, again, that price action with 2021, I think I'm drawing, we don't have that support to the left. And that made me slightly more wary of whether this is going to hold for any period of time or whether this might actually trickle straight back down into this zone, which is where true support is, in the same way as this was true support over here. And again, that was something that made me slightly wary of whether we should be really aggressively looking for longs in this area, or whether I should be a little bit more short biased. But again, the whole thing is thrown off by having the 3 months demand. So, like I say, I am just torn at this stage. I think, there's always going to be a bull case and there's always going to be a bear case. And normally I'm actually quite good at picking one and at least saying I'm swaying in one direction. And normally on a 3 month demand, that would be it. But things that would have made me more confident were if this had come down into that 3 month there. And if we didn't have all that confluence against 2021 for this potentially being the overall top. Excuse me. So then one other thing worth looking at is this bigger picture. So again, I've shared this in the channel and it's probably quite hard to follow because it's got so much on it, but this is essentially my high time frame. This is a 3 month, that high time frame, but let's go to the monthly. So this is where I just look at all the past waves, the parabola, which the original one's in pink, and then how much we've gone up and how much we've retraced each time, which is this text. And what has happened is that each wave has been getting lower, relatively lower, which is what we see with the pink parabola rolling over. And in fact, in 2021, we didn't even hit the pink parabola. And then now, presuming this is the top, we're still quite a long way off the pink parabola. So I'm looking at the trend fib and then retracement fib, but even if we just stick with the basic retracement, so this first wave went to the 227 retracement fib, second wave the same. This wave in 2022 only went to the 161 retracement fib, and then now we've only got to the 141 retracement fib. So each of those is obviously confirming rolling over the parabola. I then drew the blue parabola, potential parabola, as a possibility if we're coming off that pink one and rolling over a bit more aggressively. So that's just to see. But mainly I wanted to show this chart from the timings perspective. The fibs are slightly debatable and also slightly subjective, depending on how you look at them and what areas you're actually fibbing, etc., etc. Excuse me, bit of protein. But what we do have is what we did have very nicely with the cycles. So looking at blue, red, and yellow, so that the blue is, just looking from here, it's easier. So the blue was from the halving to the top. The red is then from the top to the bottom. And then the yellow is from the bottom to the next halving. And what we found is the total of those three was, where have I got that? Up the top here. No. For some reason I haven't actually done the total of those three. I think these were the totals, but not. So the totals, then I looked at the totals from the top to the next top. So you can see that so ignoring the first one, because the first one was significantly less accurate, but for the last 3 cycles now, and again, it's only a sample size of 3, doesn't mean that it's set in stone. And we do have, so I will say on all of this, that while we're comparing to previous cycles, I do think this cycle is very different. I think you can see things in the structure, like I say, that are less different. Like I say, I think the impulses are stronger, stronger previously than now. But the timings so far are looking pretty accurate. So from top to top, 1,431 days, top to top, from 22 to 25, 1,430 days. So those are lined up quite nicely. And I think even the previous one was 1,491. And then if we're looking from halving to top, we had 518 days, 549 days, 548 days. So again, very close on that. Interestingly, the last 2 bear markets were both nearly exactly a year long. So if that were the case, then we'd potentially expect the next bottom to be October next year. And then the distance, actually, this doesn't look. Again, it depends what time frames you draw these on there. I haven't done them on daily necessarily to know the exact days, but in fact, well, according to this now, the bottom to the next halving was 517 days in both the 23 cycle and the 2020 cycle. So again, And I think I did put the halving date in accurately, but I think that can vary depending on usage. So that might alter a little bit. But anyway, those timings were pretty accurate. So this was another confluence. So looking at whether this is the top was another confluence of that being 548 days since the halving, which is the same as the 549 days that I've got on here from the previous year. So there were those things that also kind of gave confluence to this being the top. Similarly, I had this larger black box drawn for a really long time. Which was based on those fibs that I've talked about and what I expected. And it was obviously, it's a fairly large zone. It ran from 100k to 170k. And we've come up inside that. And then I think I did a smaller box, and it was based on, I think, just that last wave and potentially being a failed wave. I believe the 113 fib on that from that last wave. Let me just have a quick look. So extension. Yeah, so the box was the 113 to 127. So Bitcoin very commonly runs, does failed waves at tops and bottoms. And I've talked about this quite a few times before. You can look at them on high time frames, on low time frames. But the 113 is Scott Carney, who did the harmonics analysis and book. Identify 113 as, I think for him it's the shark wave, but it's also the failed wave, i.e. a failed breakout or a failed breakdown. And I have done this in one of my previous videos, but if you go through and look at a lot of these charts, you'll see similar tops and bottoms. So I'm doing another illustration at the bottom here. So just running a fib for that last final wave. This actually was a bit lower, but it also depends whether you do it on log or linear. But again, the wick came a little bit lower, but the failed wave doesn't make it down to the 161 where people will be looking to take profit, and bounces before that. And you can see that on lots of different time frames. So I think it's always worth watching. Just lost the screen then. Yeah, so anyway, that's all the high time frame stuff. So let's go back to the mid time frame, which again, like I say, I haven't done much more than you've already seen. If we make it back up to here, this is 5-day supply, 3-day supply. This would be my first goal. So I had lower time frame possible shorts in here, obviously. I never like it when we've got too many zones that I'm interested in. So when I start having loads of crosses above or below of zones that I'm interested in, then you really run the risk that it runs through everything. However, I continue to leave the alerts there and set the alerts, and then we just see. Anyone who follows me knows that, for me, the alerts aren't, blindly short alerts. The red crosses here and red or green rather than black tend to be the ones that I'm slightly more confident about. My third screen, it keeps flickering black and white, which is extremely annoying, off-putting. Yeah, so the black ones are basically areas that I'm looking for possibilities. Red ones are the ones I'm more confident of. Bitcoin, I don't think it's great on the 61 fib, but that would be the 61 fib of the move from there down, which I'm not sure really how valid that is now. The move from the top, the 61 fib is higher, so not that confident of fibs there. But from a supply demand perspective, that 5-day, 3-day supply there would be the first area that I'm looking really more confidently for some sort of a short, at least for a reaction, even if it makes a higher low. And then secondly, the weekly, 2-weekly, 3-weekly supply back up here. We don't have a monthly on this now, I don't think. Oh, we do now have a monthly. God, I haven't even got around to updating all my monthlies in massive detail yet. I was thinking we just had it on Coinbase. So we now do have a very clear monthly supply up there. So yeah, again, that red cross, oops, got my colours right. That red cross there obviously is the one that I'm much more likely to be looking for. To get rid of some of these colours so I can see what I'm doing. But anyway, much more likely to be looking for shorts up there if we do get back up into that zone. And still to some extent cautiously. So unplug this thing from my... hope my final screen comes back because it's flickering out of the corner of my eye, is throwing me off. That's where I'd be more confidently looking for shorts. But as I said, don't discount the fact that we are on 3-month demand and we could just go straight back through. We have FOMC tomorrow. I don't necessarily think that's going to suddenly throw us up. It could give us a boost for sure, but it's not necessarily going to suddenly break all-time high on a single candle tomorrow, I don't think. But yeah, just be conscious that, so we're on this monthly, I think there's a monthly in there, it did wick into it and then came back down lower. In this case, I think, again, we did get some sort of reaction. Maybe it was there or there. I'm not sure. I think it was a monthly supply too. Gives some reaction, but still higher lows. And then I think this was the only one that really went straight back up through. I believe there was a monthly supply in there. So it doesn't have to give a reaction. And move my drawings. But that's where you would be more confidently looking for shorts, and ideally if there's confluence with anything else. I haven't looked any more actually at Korea, or probably should have. Yeah, so the monthly on Korea there is lower, so that's kind of interesting. Always something to be aware of. Yeah, monthly supplies in there. That one now. So the monthly is lower on the Korea pair, so that's something to be conscious of, because that might coincide a bit better with the 5-day on the US dollar pair. Then we have the monthly up here, similar spot to the US dollar pair on CME, so around the 108k mark. Yeah, so I think that's kind of it on at least the higher time frame on Bitcoin. So like I say, again, just a quick summary, because so many people are watching this and expecting this to be 2021 and do much the same as 2021, it makes me more wary that it's not going to do the same. I had, so just entries. I've talked about the short entries, so the possible short entries, now certainly the monthly supply, and then there's a 2-week inside it up there a bit higher. The more aggressive would be around the 5-day, 3-day supply, a little bit higher, around the just 101, 102 mark. Below, at the moment, I've got alerts in this box. This was the 113 fib for this last bounce, which actually I might need to update now because I think we've gone a bit higher. Still broadly around the same place. So that was if we were to get the failed wave lower. So I still have some alerts there on my lower time frame chart. And then failing that, 3-month demand down here. And we just have to observe if and when we come into that area, there's a lot of chop through here. So it could run deeper inside. The same here, it had a 3-month level on top, but it's run down to the weekly and the monthly inside. And here, so actually not monthly, weekly, and just the weekly inside. It's the 3-month, the first alert would be the 3-month level at 71,500. And then there's a monthly inside and various other zones. So obviously we can dip deeper inside if it wants to. And then if we did get some horrible move significantly lower, the yearly level at 46,000 would be my next major area of interest. But don't freak out about that yet. So like I say, we're still in 3-month demand. So I'd still hope for at least some sort of a decent move up from here. And then we'll just observe when we get there. On the case of US dollar dominance, so again, I was making the same comparisons here to 2021, because obviously if Bitcoin is going to follow the same patterns of 2021, then US dollar dominance should follow the same patterns as 2021. So this was the area that I was looking at, again, at the point of breakout. So we have some similarities, but some differences. So obviously we have similarities in that we've got this triple top and then breakout. So the similarity here being we've got a kind of triple top and then possible breakout, still trying. So there's that. However, obviously the context is very different. So at this point in time, we were still very much in an uptrend. That was just a consolidation before more uptrend. Whereas here, and here again, it's a difficult one. We are in an immediate downtrend, obviously. But are we going to break up from it? So we are trying at the moment. We've come out of the triangle consolidation, but we're also still at resistance. So again, still at the point that it could go either way. The other big issue here from the bearish on crypto perspective is this is on 6-month demand. And again, so this for me, if I was trading this chart, on its own, I'd be very bullish on this at this point. Even more so if we manage to create a 3 month. So if we do get, like this month's going to be pretty critical. If we do manage to get a strong close on this, if that close comes up into here, then again, like triangle's very difficult because, even if this gets a strong close, it's going to come right up into this 3 monthly supply. So again, we need to judge, is this an A, B, C? So if that's an A and this is the B and it comes up into that monthly supply, maybe we're going to get that C, which goes lower into the 6 month area down here. So it doesn't necessarily have to be super bearish, but the other option here is that we're having a bounce off the 6 month demand and that we're now just going to make a higher high from here. So those are my considerations there, but that's not, again, that's high time frame stuff. It's not overly tradable. What I was looking at here was what I'd last commented. That's a very rough line and it didn't even really bottom anywhere specifically. But I just said, what I was expecting now was some sideways and some faffing around before potentially getting that next move up. And then we'll assess once we get into the 3 month supply above. So we are getting that seemingly so far. We have a 5-day demand down here. We've got a 3 week and a weekly down there. We've got the monthly lower. Again, it's how much is this going to pull back? As it stands, it hasn't even broken local structure. So this is still very much just the consolidation inside local structure, much the same as Bitcoin hasn't really broken local supply yet. Ether has, but Bitcoin hasn't. So this could still run from here, but it becomes difficult because then you're uncertain as to how deep this could go. So in the case, if we look at over here, this had a weekly demand and it just held the weekly demand, messed around here for a while before going up. But similarly, there were other zones below that it could have tested if it wanted to. So again, it's just a question of assessing each zone as and when they hit. However, for now, this is just doing what I expect. The other thing I've seen is on the majors, and I don't know if I'll go into those in this stream because already I'm at 50 minutes and I'd like to quickly look at Ether and then, or maybe I won't even look at Ether today, to be honest. Yeah, is the majors, so the majors generally where I'm looking for confluence have just been all over the place this last couple of weeks. We've had 1 day through to 5 day and weekly closes, and we've had some created 5 day supply, then went straight through week supply, others created 5 day supply and then rejected, then things have created new 4 day, 3 day, 5 day supply and demand. So they're all kind of all over the place. So one of my comments was, I'm just expecting sideways. There was nothing that, like, the macro is, there was a possibility that all the majors could see a bounce from a very macro perspective, but it's not clear enough for me to be overly confident. And at the moment, like I say, everything's just up and down and all over the place. So yeah, anyway, let's just quickly look at the low time frame. So this was just something I posted in the channel last week, and again, like my indecision on this. So what we had a 12-hour supply here, which is where I was looking for shorts. I think when I last talked about it, so this is my low time frame chart where I just put zones. I'm not always on top of this, so I don't know what new zones have been created. Like, for example, this one was a short, I think was at the start of the week, the end of Tuesday. And it created a 2 day and a daily demand, which it then tested and came straight off. So, I can have an entry there, and that's great in this case to give a small reaction. But if it changes structure and I haven't had a chance to look at it, then people need to do the analysis. What we had at this point in time, it tried to hit the 12-hour and then came back for a second test and did get it. But at this point, when I posted, move that out of the way, I was saying, okay, we've got a 4-hour and 2 day demand in here. Then I was saying, okay, well, we've got a lot of liquidations at 90k, so we could just get a run, take out those liquidations and then get a run higher. Or we could end up going, this 2 day zone is large and we could end up retracing a lot of this imbalance. Just to be completely awkward, it's ended up bouncing somewhere in the middle. And I don't even think that was the 61 fib. Ether, on the other hand, was a lot nicer on that. So what fib that was at. So yeah, the 61, I've got it over here actually. The 61 was just a little bit lower than where that wick came to. So not very helpful, and I don't trade in the middle. So I know a lot of people trade fair value gaps. I think they're pointless and don't understand them. So I won't trade a fair value gap if you pay me. However, there were entries here. Then it just did this very nasty wick down, and particularly nasty on Ether before pumping on Sunday. So anyway, what we ended up getting is we did get a small bounce off that 2-day, but it ended up just going back into supply. Then it came down lower and actually, in fact, sort of did get the bounce off 90k a little bit, but didn't get much higher and then messed around. So we still have the possibility that it's kind of come down from here. But as I've said, the point of those two was that this is still in an upward structure. We're still in this channel. We had a higher low here. It's just a question of how deep the higher low comes next time. So that higher low could have come from as high as up here, which is really preferable, or it could have come deeper. In this case, we just got some fuckery that sent it low, quite frankly. So that was those, and just hide those so we can see a little bit more what we're doing. I always keep them. I don't delete them. I don't delete any of the arrows, any of the analysis. I keep them in folders so I can look back at them later and just confirm where I was right, where I was wrong. So then here over the weekend, so yeah, I didn't manage to get any longs in here, although once it actually had this pump, it did have some entries through here. The difficulty I had yesterday, again, I wasn't really on top of it yesterday, but was that we had the CME gap lower than where these wicks came to yesterday and today. And I really wanted that gap to fill before running, so I wasn't really looking for longs until I saw that gap filled. Similarly, I like it in the same as I said on the high time frame Bitcoin. I really don't like when we end up, just in this sort of gap between candles here, these fair value gaps. I don't think it happens very often. Mostly we get down to a zone that I'm interested in for longs, which is why I just don't trade them. So yeah, I didn't try, okay, arguably we picked up this kind of support from over here and before this big bar in the middle. I do have some arguments that I use at times where we've come up, we retest that this should, in inverted commas, have bounced there and gone higher, and that this, people calling them a deviation, is a sort of fake out. So I then will sometimes draw trend lines like that. So in this case, I hadn't done that, but yeah, so that, gives some argument for the potential of this holding as support when it's retested, even though it's been run through. However, that's a support resistance type of analysis. It's not a supply demand analysis. And for me, supply demand is by far and away the most accurate. There are other things that come into play. You can use confluence from other stuff, and I use a lot of confluence stuff, mostly across pairs more than across analysis. Yeah, so like I said, I hadn't looked at that in detail anyway. So then what we've had now again, we've got this. So I had an alert there. I think there was some low time frame. Let me see. I think there was an untested 4-hour here. I was a little bit wary of it because, well, firstly because we're coming off a higher low, but also because CME I think had tested that zone on Friday or Thursday or Friday. But I left the entry possibility in there anyway. So what's happened obviously is we've come up and taken out previous week's high, having taken out Monday's low today. Again, something that's not overly surprising, and I just haven't been on top of it today. I again now need to think about things given we've taken out that high. If this does end up as a swing failure, so I'll remove that. This CME gap was left from here last night as well. But yeah, this is the lower gap that hasn't been filled. If this does end up a swing failure, taking out having last week's high, then potentially we can take out last week's low. So at the moment, I haven't got any more aggressive long entries in. I may or may not put some. I need to think about them. I did have this one here. So the entry we had from last week was on 12-hour demand, and then I said there was a possibility that we would take out some stops because there was a 15-minute down there that hadn't quite been tested. And then I've got a couple more entries in that, or close to that 113 extension box that I looked at on the other chart a minute ago. And those are just low time frame, if the price starts moving. So we've got to be very careful tomorrow with FOMC. So I won't be trading any of these on FOMC. I want to see what plays out from that. And then once we go lower down here, that 3-month demand that I talked about, the monthly inside and various things. I still, this is still a very corrective move. I can still very much see this being a bear flag and fulfilling that channel and then dropping. So I guess we'll just see. The only thing I can see now looking at this is that we do have an hourly supply put in up there. So if you want to look for shorts based off this hourly supply, that's a fairly tight risk to reward trade. I'm saying that very off the cuff. I haven't looked at any confluence or any data. I don't know where the liquidations are. So I'm suggesting, before potentially taking this, check that this did actually take out some liquidations. I did look briefly at whether this was a short squeeze, and I did see very much that on Bybit at least there were a lot of shorts closed on this run up, and there were a lot of longs closed as well. Binance appeared to be a bit more all over the place, so I need to look a bit more at that. But yeah, this is a possibility for a short if we come up and test that hourly there, even if you just get a scalp. Then above just a lower time frame, well, so a higher time frame I've already talked about. This is the 5-day supply up here that I've got on the higher time frame chart that I've already talked about, where that black cross is. So this kind of area up here, that's a little bit lower on the low time frame chart. So that's the red arrow up there. And then there's it's again, like I say, it's kind of messy and becomes awkward. So we've got trend line stops through here. I think we've got a weekly high there, so it's worth watching that. Then we've got obviously the high of the whole sort of range. So these areas are where I'm really looking for liquidations and just looking for what price does. So circled area is potentially looking for some sort of a stop hunt if we do get a bit higher on this. Then, I was then toying with, well, there's also this 4-hour untested supply a little bit higher. And again, if it was going to front run everybody entering shorts, potentially we could see a rejection there. It's the 70 fib. So these are all things I need to think through a little bit more. And I don't, like I say, I don't like it when I have too many possible entries, because that tends to mean price can then run through everything. So I need to think that through a little bit more. Right, yeah, so I think that's about it on Bitcoin. Let's have a quick look at Ether. So Ether, so the BTC pair first, a lot of people have been watching these trend lines. I can have two just for hypothesizing purposes. A lot of people watching these trend lines. I've been watching this zone since this weekly. It took its sweet time, but did give it a nice indicator at the weekend. So the only thing with Ether US dollar pair, which I'll get to doing that nasty wick down, what I had said in the group, that while it made 4 or 5 day demand, and I think it hit the 3K level that I was originally looking at, I did say I didn't really like that this, at that point, was just kind of floating in the middle of nowhere. So when we did have the big drop on Sunday, we had this wick which came down to the daily inside. So that was a pretty nice entry for that. But like I say, I only kind of commented it verbally rather than managing to alert in advance. At this point, we're now hitting 3-day weekly supply. So again, like Ether for me now isn't a long entry, or at least not against BTC. If you're going to long, you want to be longing BTC pair, not this. I didn't have this as an area of interest. We've got a weekly supply above that hasn't been tested, but this obviously can just as easily reject here. So we'll have to see what type of reaction we get off here. This is also confluent with the monthly supply here, which we had the swing fail of, and there's a push through previously. So it's an interesting area of resistance and an area I wouldn't be looking to long on Ether. So well done if you got into longs on Ether elsewhere. So from a high time frame perspective, so I had a few possibilities on this. Similar that I'd commented on Bitcoin, that we had this 3-month level here, but then again, the prospect of going deeper inside, there wasn't good confidence on Bitcoin when we first hit that. We had that bounce and again, didn't get very high. I had commented previously that this sort of cluster of monthly and at the yearly levels were areas that I'd be nervous about breaking. And you can see we had lots of wicks onto the top of there before running through and then flipping that to supply. I can't remember if I got that on the lower time frame or not, but then we had the bigger drop. Slightly annoyingly on this, like I did want this to get down to the monthly inside the 3-month. And I think, remember the 61 fib. So the 61 fib on the log scale is down by this black cross. And okay, so it did. Ether, what I found is when Ether turns bearish, it does like to respect the 61 fib. I don't know if you can hear that. There appears to be a dog fight outside my window. Just wait till that hopefully stops. Actually, I feel like when I did my last stream, I think you couldn't actually hear that on the stream. But anyway, I can hear it very loudly. So yeah, this did, yeah. So what I was saying was, Ether, when it starts to get low liquidity and people become less interested in it, i.e. more bearish, it respects 61 fibs a lot more than anything else, quite frankly. And so we see that here when it made that low, like, so I had look at the kind of a slight front run. There was a 12-hour demand, I think, in here, and then obviously the top of these wicks. So that was a possibility for a long, and that's where it bounced. I was still hoping for it to come back down, particularly when it did this drop here. I was hoping we'd get a move down into there, but no, that's run up and then also has now hit this 3-day, 5-day zone, which was my first proper area of short interest on the higher time frame. Now, I think this hasn't made a monthly supply, but I will just check. No, it hasn't. So above on this, we do have lots of weekly supplies. I think there's a couple of 2 weeks in there as well. So there's a lot of chop above. But now we're kind of in the first significant area of interest for possible shorts. Now, if you look on the 5-day chart, what we did have the close on, so I think it's not the close on Tuesday, I think that's the close of the 5-day candle, which I think was on Saturday, did create 5-day demand by a hair and 4-day demand again by a hair, very slight closes above. This already had the 2-day, like Bitcoin had the 2-day, but then Bitcoin ended up running a lot deeper inside it. But again, there's just this wick was super awkward on Sunday. So I'll go to the lower time frame chart in a minute, but I had, even in the updates I did in the channel, I was looking for the 3K, the possibility of 3K holding, with Bitcoin potentially taking out those stops at 90K. So that's kind of what we had for a little bit, but then this wick potentially would have taken everybody out before the pump today. Similarly to Bitcoin, again, we had a CME gap, which wasn't quite closed on the open. Now, both these gaps came very close to being closed. And Ether I care about a lot less, but Bitcoin does normally come back, even if it's close, it does normally come back. But I think, the PA, I think, is just a bit messy and off at the moment anyway because of FOMC, because even the indices are acting slightly weird and Forex is acting slightly weird. Everything's just being a bit weird. So again, my bias on the higher time frame on Ether. I'm going to go again to the other charts so I can show something without all my drawings in the way. We'll use. Ooh, there you go. I think that's kind of what I was commenting on. Okay, yeah, so I can at least use this to illustrate why those arrows are quite so big. So my concerns on Ether from a bearish perspective is that, again, we've had this, we had an up move here, we had a retracement, we've had a breakout, we've had a retracement. We had what was then a very corrective move up. So then I was unsurprised when this happened. We were looking for longs in here. Again, unfortunately, I wanted a very slightly lower on the 3-month there. That 3-month level at 1329 wasn't quite tested. And then obviously we had this big pump. We had a lot of ETF buying coming in here. So my problem on the bear side is that we still have this larger range. We've got the large range, then we've got potentially a smaller range for this last up move. And we have a stop hunt of the high. So typically what this is saying is that this demand and this test on this demand is not strong enough to take out the high, or not in any significant manner. So that's when we come down to test here again, or even demand in between here, that they're not likely to be strong enough for a breakout. Now they might be, and you can still look at them for longs, there's still demand. However, when we're typically looking at a larger range like this, I would then basically be saying, okay, well, we've taken out this high, we've swing failed. Are we just going to take out this low and get back into that yearly zone, with this being an A, the A there, B, and then C. So now C can be a triangle or it can be a zigzag. So, maybe the C comes into here. Maybe we get an aggressive C wave, A, B, C, and then we get that move up. I'm not sure. So I really want to look at Ether BTC to see what that's going to give us. But this is my bearish concern on this. Again, so exactly the same as Bitcoin, bullish perspective. We've got this not great offset 3-month demand. So we had that 3-month level. Like I said, I wasn't overly keen on that long entry up there, but it's something I want to watch because it's a 3-month zone. So we had the possibility there. And then The first zone of interest was that monthly insider. The first like proper zone of interest was this monthly insider with this first arrow. The second option was then what we just retrace back to the start of this up move. And again, if this whole thing is, is just a kind of corrective, my brush, just a kind of corrective move, then we could, just end up ranging around in here for some time longer. And do be aware that Litecoin, Ripple, okay, now has had a breakout, but again, did have a bit of a catalyst. And some of the other the other majors have kind of done the same thing. We always look at Ether as like the number 2, but a lot of the other majors, when you look at the high time frames, so like Litecoin, for example, has also bounced on this annual demand, and really all we've got from Litecoin ever since then is this sideways. And I've heard some talk recently that maybe Litecoin's going to pull a Ripple and do that 7-year breakout, and yes, it's possible. And obviously the slight difference with Ether is that it did break out in 2020, whereas I think the others didn't. I think Litecoin maybe just fell the high, or was just a slightly lower high. But either way, Litecoin's now also in this sort of 7-year sideways consolidation, or 7, or maybe even a bit longer than Ripple. So maybe it's going to have that big up move. But again, like I just said, okay, while that might happen on Litecoin, I'm certainly not willing to hold it in the hope that it might happen in the next 15 years. If it gives me some decent demand, then I might long it. But at the moment, Litecoin has no decent demand on it. But anyway, yeah, so in the case of this, are we just going to get some sideways for some extended period of time on the higher time frame? That the monthly here is the first area of interest for longs, which I've missed at this point. Or we're just going to get a BC and we're just going to come back down and test that zone. Then again, like I say, the start of the impulse, this is a decent move up. It did break this high, even though we rejected all-time high. So maybe we come back and get a bounce at the start of this impulse, and then the bigger, actually this should be a bit higher, but that 3-month below there would be another preferred area. Then in an ideal world, we don't, I'm wrong, and this isn't a range. This isn't a range with the swing failure of the high, but the play out of if you shorted the top of the range is potentially to get back down now into proper demand down here, and it could be the top of that yearly, or it could be the 61 fib inside it, and then we get that bigger move. So those are kind of really the bearish scenarios. And as I said, the bullish scenario is that we are on 3-month demand. We do have a monthly demand here. We have a decent up move here. So again, if you want to trade the longs from here, having said this is an up, retrace, and we're expecting a third up move, then that's also a completely viable possibility. For me, just looking at all those different options. So going back to the original chart, if I can find it. I'm just trying to remember which one is which, because I have so many different things drawn, different charts now. I think it's that one. Click next chart, yeah. So still excuse my mess, but okay, so let me just hide the drawings again quickly. So we have from a 2-week perspective, we have broken a 2-week demand. So at this point, while the 3-month is potentially still up, while we haven't tested that monthly, I'd still potentially be wanting to look for, my drawings are going to come back when I do this, but for some retest up here and then drop back into this zone, and then I want to see the reaction in that zone. Lost my monthly box, so I'm going to redraw that quickly. So yeah, and potentially come back into that the green circle and look for preferably longs there if I can get them, and then hope that we don't just run straight through that in the same manner that we did here and end up right back down at the start without any particular opportunity to get back in again. So from a lower time frame perspective, the areas I was looking for shorts, again, like Bitcoin, there's just too many of them, which makes it challenging. And some things I've commented on previously. So like I say, if there's lots of zones, we can run straight through them. But the other alternative is we bounce off every single one of them. So I tend to leave them alerted. Something we got here, we had a bounce there. It wasn't the best bounce in the world, but certainly did give, this is the daily chart, gave us 6 days of up move before the second drop down. So obviously we can get reactions at any zones. And I'm trying to give you a a kind of a broad view of the possibilities. So on this, we did make 4 or 5 day demand, as I said before. So it is possible, that bounce there could propel us straight through this supply. But at this point in time, given this is hitting the 3-day supply in there, given Ether BTC is also at resistance, I think it's a reasonable time to start looking for shorts on this. Above here, obviously we had the prospect of taking out, we had a whole bunch of equal highs here. So I had a circle there for the prospect of maybe looking for a swing failure there if we get back. And it's back to that cluster of levels that I said were somewhere I potentially would like to look for shorts. From a fib perspective, fibs I tend to prefer on the linear to the log. But from a fib perspective, that would be just above the 61 fib as well. But again, that's just that last down move. Then the bigger picture, like the bigger 61 fib from the top, is in this red area. So that's if we come back up and hit 1 week, 2 week supply, that would be the preferable area if you're a high time frame trader for a high time frame looking for shorts. And then on the long side, so I've already talked about, the monthly demand. If we come down and hit that, there's a bit of a CME gap there that hasn't been closed. The 61 fib on this, that was the log time frame. Actually, so we've hit the 61 fib on the linear time frame, ready for this to last for the move since the bottom. And the 61 fib on the long time frame was by that black cross. So that's just if we come deeper into the monthly demand. Then I really haven't got much. We might see entries. And like I say, at the start of the impasse, it's possible we get some bounce at 1600 or something like that. But at the moment, I'm not really considering that. And then I'd look back at these, filling these gaps down here and the 3-month demand below, and then just really praying that this zone holds for the higher low. I'm not overly confident, I have to say. Yeah, so that's that. That gives you all the entries that I'm looking at anyway. From a low time frame perspective, just quickly on Ether. So Ether, I've had a few more entries on. So we had the long I talked about, and that's the higher time frame long, came down a bit low, went up, decent short off there, and then a couple of long entries down here. If we held a bit more aggressively, or if we went a bit deeper, went down to the second one. This one I talked about in the group and in the channel as well. Like I was kind of consistently alerting levels all the way up because there were so many, even on the time frames. I think we had 12 hours, dailies, etc., in here. So I kept alerting them just to keep an eye on and see. And then finally, we did get a hit on that one. There was always the risk in here because of the trend line stops that we could run through these. So again, like I say, I was highlighting the risk of that. Then back down here, I think I did talk in the channel about 3K being the kind of critical area that I wanted to see hold, ideally in conjunction with Bitcoin taking out that 90K stops. We did get a hold there, but then this wick down. And this is another illustration of the 61 fibs. So again, obviously it just bounced up with these pink ones at like 5 and 15 minute zones. But so again, if I show you the 61 fib there down to this level, it pretty much reacted exactly at the 61 level. And that was the bottom of the wick, and then we ran up. The confidence that I had, so again, they verbally just commented in the channel that was at the 61 fib, and then Ether BTC hitting the daily demand was good confluence for that. And then it just ran straight from there. I had, so on both Bitcoin and Ether, I had these short entries here that gave decent reactions, but then just back down into local demand consolidation before moving up today. And today I haven't been on top of this. Again, this was an entry I had that was an untested, I think, 15-minute there. Like really when it takes this long, in fact, it was a 10-minute. Really when it takes this long consolidation before coming back to test a 10-minute, it doesn't surprise me at all that we go straight through it. And I had also alerted the possibility, lower time frame, that we would take out stops of this trend line. But as you can see, we've run straight back up through those. I'm not always right. I'm often right, but I'm not always right. We've actually slightly, I had the arrow at the 12-hour here, but the alert's gone for the 3-day, and you can see we're already starting to drop a little bit. So keep an eye on this, assuming it doesn't just BART straight back down again. You see what Bitcoin's doing. These may just BART straight back down. I'll see some follow up there. Like I say, I haven't been on top of this today at all. So, but anyway, I hope that gives you some idea of the zones I'm looking at. I don't want to do, this has been what, an hour and 18 minutes. Like, I don't want to go into massive amounts of detail on much else and make the stream stupidly long. I might quickly look at the total and others though, just so you can get a sense of my thoughts on the alt market. So, I mean, total really just looks like Bitcoin. It's got the monthly supply above. Total 2, like Ether, doesn't have monthly supply, does have a bunch of weekly and 2 weeklies. So that's just trying to push through. But again, up in 5-day supply at the moment. So what you'll notice on the now going down here is that these areas that I've had for possible bounces previously have been hit. So we are at a good spot on most of the market cap charts. But now, we are breaking trend line, but now we really just need to start seeing some of this supply broken. And we need to see, if this is the bottom and it's much like this, we need to see this to start move up through here and then give us some consolidation before potentially getting another move up if we're going to remain bullish. However, as you also know, so the total 2, the same as Ether, we've got that possible double top, which makes me nervous. We've got really what is a horrible head and shoulders here. Excuse me. On this one, it's a horrible head and shoulders. On others, it's a lot better. It's not a head and shoulders because it's at a higher high. But, again, rising channel or something equally not impulsive on this. Total 3, which basically sort of shows what the majors are doing. Again, 3 months demand, monthly inside. The wick came deep down inside it and it's tried to hold each of these levels. Again, could see a run up on this, but still early days. This really, like I said, I'm not going to go into the majors today, but this kind of really shows a lot of what the majors are looking like. They had this very weak 5-day supply in this case. Some of them came back through it, rejected the one above and came down. And then in some cases, they made new 3-day, 4-day, weekly, etc. This is made a 2-day. But again, it's just in a sideways range. So it's, it's giving some hope. It's in an area that I would have wanted to long, but I need to see a bit more than what it's giving so far. On the other hand, others. So again, we had some difficulty with this. So excuse me, very messy. So what did happen on this is it did have a poor monthly close. So this is a monthly supply made up of those 3 candles. It closed below that level. So this is what I would call an indirect monthly supply. It's not that pretty, and it's not something I would short, if I was trading this chart itself. If it closes the 2-month, that's going to be slightly nicer from a short perspective. But again, this just isn't looking that great on the higher time frames. Just put my drawings back. So again, if you followed me previously, you know this is what I was expecting. And I've got a lot of other drawings that I won't bring out now just to show. But these are things that I was wanting for a long time. We had this, we had the lower high, we had this head and shoulders, and I was expecting this drop. I did want that drop down to here, and we haven't got that. And the problem I've had now is that this wick that we did have, firstly, was too fast to get into any alts, was intensely irritating. And secondly, has held this support. So now I'm like, well, now are we in more of a sideways range here? And we're just going to hold here and then go up? Or are we going to continue this down move? The other thing again, when I talk about impulsive versus corrective, so impulse correction, this was, again, not an impulse. And I talked about this many times on stream, that this was what I appeared to me to be a rising channel, and we were going to break down from it. So there are all these things that made me quite bearish on this and on alts. So now locally, so what I've been really mulling over is, are we going to get even a move back down to here to test the bottom of that wick? On a lot of alts, you've seen that. Or are we going to get a move all the way back down to there, which would really obliterate alts that even aren't already obliterated? And if that is the case, that's fine. I still probably think that's going to happen. And then it was just how much, what we were doing here is making lots of trend line stops. And a lot of alts have this. A lot of alts have this 2-month supply above. So keep an eye on this 2-month supply above, but then trend line stops through that zone and then untested monthly or 2-monthly supply above that. So I can still see on a lot of boards, and we have seen on some of them, these massive crazy wicks that are just going through everything. Like most of those we're seeing the crazy wicks on are on this last couple of weeks have been on the shit coins. However, the previous, I think in October when we first had this, I think it was this bounce, so this up move here, this green candle, we had some of the kind of mid-low caps run, so not the real shit coins, but for example, near Phil, I can't think of others now, but there are a bunch of them. And Phil is a great example of this. So if you go and look at the Phil chart, it had I think a monthly or a 2-monthly supply, and it's wicked all the way back through it. But all it's done is swing fail the top of it. I can't remember if it went into the supply above, but it just swing fail the top and then blasted all the way back through and closed the month back below. Near has done exactly the same thing. So we are seeing some of the alts take out these trend line stops, but unfortunately not enough, or not enough of them are doing it, not unfortunately, but not enough of them are doing it to really affect this chart. So again, if I look on the lower time frame, so you can see, so this was the period that we had some of that happen. And then what's really happened is that some of them are still in this kind of area, but a whole bunch of them have just broken all-time lows again. Or not all-time lows, but broken this low again. Near, for example, is one of them. It's just come straight back down and not cared. It got really high into supply, but then it just came back down. But the difficulty I've had here is, are we going to do this market wide? And so far that's not been the case. And as of last week, we made a weekly supply. It's come up quite high inside it today. But this is still a weekly supply right here. It's a weekly supply. So if I move my drawings, I can show you. So it's closed back below this candle. It's just closed up by a wick, so it could flip this back to demand, but it's not something I want to trade against. If it's going to flip it back to demand, I want to see it close above here, then be able to get long on a retest of it. And at the moment, it's just not giving me that. In its defense, the only thing it did make yesterday was a daily demand in here, which is what we've seen some of the alts blast off today and so a few of the majors. So we had some stops up here that we took those on those wicks. We had some stops here. So I was initially kind of going, and then because of that monthly level, so initially I think when I drew this line, I was just being a lot more optimistic that we were going to come down and then have a really big bounce, have a lot of alts come back up into here. This could be a decent December alt season. Before then we get a bigger rejection. But then given what I'm actually seeing on the market, I was like, are we even going to get something as aggressive as that? And maybe we'll just get a bounce off here and it's just going to take us up into this monthly level, maybe take out that green circle of stops, and then we get another drop. And I could mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're just going to get super bullish. In its defense, this did have a big wick and buyback, and arguably, I think, yeah. So I use this as one of the last comments I make. I think I make on this because it's now nearly 10 p.m. here and I need to eat dinner. This big wick down we had. Somebody said to me, "Oh, you know what wicks mean? They mean a big buyback." Yes, I'm tending to agree with him. However, in this case, I'm not so sure because we had the whole drama with Wintermute, Market Maker, and Binance, and a lot of the charts only show this wick on Binance, or they'll show some version of the wick on other exchanges, but shorter and nowhere near to the extent that Binance had it. Binance had a whole bunch of alts basically went to zero and then rebounded to near enough where they started. But does that really constitute a massive buyback, or is that Binance just rescuing the market, or the market rebalancing such that all the exchanges are aligned again? And yeah, that's just sort of very, very hard to judge. So what we do often see is wicks retrace in their entirety. So you can see, for example, over here, big wick down, bounced around for a while, but then retraced back to the bottom of the wick. However, obviously this is an extreme wick. There was wick there, and obviously that didn't retrace the whole thing. I think there are not many others on this chart, probably. Yeah, I mean, that's probably the most dramatic wick that we've had for a while. But like I say, in the bigger picture, again, similar comments to Ether, the things that concern me about this is that lower high in here, higher low there, but didn't test annual demand down here. Even if we are to make a kind of triangle structure, I still potentially would like to see a test on this level. And the bullish scenario, I guess I just need to see. But at the moment, there's nothing that's really making me bullish for alts as a whole. Remove everything. There's nothing really that's making me bullish for alts as a whole at the moment. Yes, we might get some rallies. Yes, I think it's still worth longing alts. And again, if you follow me, one of the critical things to know is that I haven't since 2021, I think. Maybe not as far back as that, but it's since around here. And certainly for this run, I haven't been really bullish on the whole market. Because all I've seen for this period of time is a whole bunch of alts that had annual supplies, that yes, they went down, yes, they came back up, yes, you can trade that and it's a great long, but now prices are back down here. That's what I see on most alts. And if you go looking at a lot of these charts, a lot of the stuff I'm looking at the moment is new stuff, but let's look at OL because that's an alert that came in today. This is just, I'll show you this just as a last thing to give an illustration. So what we have here, the annual. So firstly, we have the prospect of closing an annual supply here. So if we close below this level here, 45, then we're going to make an annual supply. So that's not great. But I want to see some of those closes come in first. At the moment, even then, that level is already a 6-month supply. We've already rejected it. And I think the rejection probably came first and then we went down. 3 months, there is a prospect here that we might create a 3-month supply at that level, which is probably already a 2-month level. So at the moment, we see a lot of alts have a 2-month supply in here, and they're coming up and testing them now, as you can see here. And these levels might also be 3-month levels by the end of the year, depending on if we get an alt season for the next 3 weeks, which is possible. So then you can see here, again, there's very clear when you look at these high time frame charts. So don't be fooled by anyone who will kind of go, oh, long here. You'll get a lot of people that will put a thing on the chart who'll kind of decide there's an entry here or that we're going to break some like falling wedge or something and start doing targets like this off the top of the screen, crazy targets. So don't be fooled by anyone who does that. Eventually, maybe they might be right if we get another alt season. But for now, this is clearly in a monthly downtrend. You can see it drops, comes back up, makes green candle, monthly supply, drops. And in this case, it was weak monthly supply, but it still rejected it, drops. We do have these giant wicks. If you believe that's a massive buyback, maybe we are ready to break through. Arguably, we do have, potentially a 5-wave structure down. But at the moment, this is a 2-month supply, so I'm not going to be aggressively looking for longs on this. I'm not going to say, oh, this is a reversal. Why would I say it's a reversal when we've seen enough of these candles before that just reject and come back down again? So at the moment, we're in 2-month supply. Let's just hit that alert today. On the counter to that, so I said the bigger picture, I'm still short biased. On the counter to that is we have these trend line stops, and this is a very nice clear one. So if this does, if we are going to have a market reversal, and in some cases, some alts will just go through, like some alts we just go up, they're not going to care there's a monthly supply there because that's crypto, and it doesn't always care about supply and demand once it gets the momentum behind it. So of course you'll see some of these break, but for the most part, I'm not seeing that. In a lot of cases, I have alerted here. So, because I just want to see reactions. At the moment, my longs alerts that are going off are very much 50-50. Some of them are holding for bounces there. Most of them is still too early to tell. They're just kind of consolidating on here. Like I haven't really seen anything go right. I'm going to go straight up through and take those stops. But in some of these cases, I'm setting tentative alerts here. It's got that in this case, I think it's a 5-day. Yeah, so actually this already came off a 5-day demand. I think it might make a 4-day demand in there. Already, it's come off 4-day and 5-day demand already. But I need to see more from this. I need to see if this is going to change structure. I need to see it break that high, this high, come up into here, then come back down slowly, have a new demand for a retest, and then look for a long entry. And that's fine. And, you know, in the cases that we're going to get ones that pull cryptos and just do giant green candles through that, then I'm going to miss those because there'll be 1 in a million, and picking them is incredibly hard. And I've said that a number of times anyway, that picking any alt that's going to suddenly throw a giant candle is just very, very hard. I'm trying to think if I've got an example one here. I haven't got one that's throwing a giant green candle, but let's say something like this. You can see that if it does start running up, that it's got nice space. So these are the ones I am looking at for potential for longs. This would have been really hard to get into because it's just a messy, not clear, not impulsive structure, and would run the risk of taking out all those trend line stops. This could be a very nice short if it does reject here, so keep an eye on this one. But, you know, you can see here when it's had these giant wicks. So if you're lucky enough, I don't know if these were far too low time frame to... Yeah, I mean, in some cases, these wicks are just an hour. Some of them on the 4-hour chart and things like that. But then, you know, again, if there is so many, well, there's 700 odd altcoins, how are you going to predict? You know, are you going to predict that this is the one, for example? You know, it's got a massive gap here to fill, but what's to say that this one's going to do that versus reject and just do that? And that's what I find very hard to judge. So for the most part, I'm still shorting supply. That's still the higher probability trade. And then as I showed on OL, you can see I upgraded my trading view as well. Now I have 16 charts on here rather than 8, which is probably quite horrendous for anyone watching on the vertical format. Yeah, so ones like these, yes, there's a possibility of taking out these trend line stops. If you do happen to get something off the lows here and you want to hold for that possibility, then go ahead. But like I say, for me, I'm like, be conscious of where your monthly supplies are, and your 6 monthlies is still in the 6 monthly supply. Don't forget, be conscious, you know, you're coming off monthly supply, you're retesting, you're coming back down, you're coming off monthly supply, you're retesting. Yeah, you can see sometimes I screw up, sometimes I think, right, reversal, am I, you know, long up here? Mostly these for me are, so this was lower time frame, this would have been an entry in there, and getting that, just that last up move. Right, what else? Okay, like I'm going to go because it's 10:05 and this is an hour and 36 minutes. I think I've covered all the things I need to cover. Let's see what Bitcoin's doing. So this is already just coming back down. I'll try and put a post in the channel once I see what the daily closes are like on these. Maybe I'll just have a quick look at what indices have done today. Oops. We've got silvers in my area of interest. Interesting. So we've got the US 30s not doing so well today, and S&P seems to be following. Nasdaq's still going sideways, and Russell is potentially attempting to break all-time high again. So it's going to be interesting what we see from FOMC tomorrow. So, like I say, I don't want to make too much judgment before that, when we can see if that's going to, you know, break out the indices, make them break all-time high, or whether it's going to kill them again. The dollar's in, you know, also in a hard spot. We had euro made a weekly demand, but not a very good one. The dollar's made a weekly supply, but also was coming off 2 weekly demands. So again, for me, could go either way. But yeah, I do recall that my higher time frame bias on the dollar has been up since July, hitting annual demand at the low here. I at least wanted to hit 3 months, 6 months supply, a little bit higher there to see the reaction. Unfortunately, didn't get that here, which is when I wanted it to. So again, looking for the reaction on the dollar when we get up into those levels, and obviously it can go significantly higher inside these massive zones. That's just the start of the zone, but it's always good to see the reaction at the start of the zone. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. If anyone's there, let me know if you have any questions or if there's anything I didn't cover. See if anyone's actually watch the whole thing, or hopefully going to watch the video later. No, I think that's it. So yeah, I've covered pretty much everything I wanted to cover in that. Not giving you much hope on alts giving you semi-hope, but also just both the 50-50, like the probabilities both ways on Bitcoin and Ether. And yeah, just waiting the outcome of FOMC tomorrow. I might try and do another stream tomorrow on alts. So do let me know if you have any. Hi, GamesTube. Do let me know if you have any alt requests for tomorrow at least. Can I look at H? I was going to say for tomorrow, but no for now, apparently. Sure. H I was liking before because of the lack of resistance, but yeah, I was looking at these yesterday and thinking, because I also looked at, what was it? It was Truth or Trust, I forget which one. Just check. So looking at just showing this, because looking in the context, like some of these that have had these big pumps, I just don't know. Like, I mean, obviously you can see Truth is now just, it had a monthly demand in there and it just looks like it wants to die forever. So then H, I'm just uncertain, you know, like while we look at these things, yeah, I figured it was you. While we look at these things based on, I'm going to have a cigarette. Did well an hour and a half without smoking. I need to not smoke if I'm going to repost the video on TikTok, but since I can't post on TikTok because it's longer than an hour now, it's kind of irrelevant. The difficulty I have now with these is, are they just going to die forever? Because we've seen so many now in the past. Let's look at like Leia, you know, where they've had these, you know, they've been the outlier, they've had these massive pumps, and then, you know, you're trying to potentially get in for another move, and then no, just dies forever. So it's very hard to tell with H. However, okay, so I guess, and so the other issue I have with H, so yeah, I had this alert for the 3-day. So what have we got? Do we have monthly demand in here or not? So we kind of have a dubious 2-month over the whole thing. I say dubious because it's the first candle and also because it hasn't broken the high. So this is a weak 2-month demand. Then we had the 2-week, but obviously it was made by this nasty wick candle. So again, it's a question of, is it going to retrace that whole wick or not? The other thing I didn't love about this was the close below that 2-week level there. So arguably this is now a 2-week supply, but again, it's not really one that I would want to kind of draw like that because it's offset. Yeah, so you also started for my 3-day alert. So yeah, then I think, as I always do, you know, when the 2-week alert started, and then when we were looking at it last weekend, weren't we, to see if it was going to get through this 12-hour supply, and it didn't. I then just pulled the alert down just to see, okay, there is more support here, and then the support obviously at the bottom of these wicks over here. So it's come down a little bit lower inside that 3-day. That's fair enough, but we still need to see some sign of strength. So what have we got locally? The other thing on this, again, was that this 8-hour underneath here hasn't been tested by that wick. And this is what I was going to say a minute ago. This is where the supply and demand thing can become a bit dubious on crypto, because while we're still in uptrends, then supply and demand are going to work very well, and supply tends to work very well anyway because people get trapped and then they're like so happy to get out, break even. Demand becomes a lot more dubious because, you know, once this has happened, then people forget about it. Either they're trapped in here and they want to get back out, but they don't add once you've seen a big drop like that, or they add and then they're just back in the short again. So it's hard to know if the momentum's just died forever. So I tend to be, in this case, like I set the alerts and I wanted to look at this because we had this big drop, because we have all these trend line stops above. So if it does get a pump, it could be a bit like Light and get a big pump. Light's another one that's just died today, I think, through local demand after having taken out some of the stops. But yes, I mean, we're holding the 4-hour demand here. So are you in this trade based on that 4-hour already? Gosh. I mean, if you're in this, there's nothing wrong with being in that. You know, we're in an area of interest. It's slightly dubious because we've got so much mess over here and because we've got the wick, but to trade that 4-hour demand is not horrendous. It's had a decent move up off there. It's still very early. So the only thing I would say on this is I think it's fine to start this to trade like this. Be careful if we make an 8-hour supply in here. But just be conscious that at the moment, and you can see here that if you're trading, this just rejected 12-hour. Remember I was saying at the weekend, if this creates an 8-hour demand, and it kind of did just by a hair, but it was still coming off 12-hour supply. But I'm finding the 8 hours aren't very reliable when we're in big down moves at the moment, or when we're still coming off local supply. So be a bit careful with trading too low timeframes in general on these. So this is what I would consider obviously a 4-hour very early entry on this. But yeah, just keep your stop tight under the 4-hour, and I think if it breaks that, just forget it. The ones I'm seeing running better are the ones that are giving you 3 days. So, for example, things that are looking a bit more like this, ideally without that supply there. But in this case, it's tested the supply, it's made a lower low, it's come back. It's still in the supply, but it's made a 3-day demand. But the ones that are really running are the ones that are coming 3-day and 5-day. So even OL that I showed you a minute ago. If you see ones, even if they're not really on great support down here, but if you see ones like this that have just created that 5-day demand, it's a fairly small zone, it's a fairly tight stop that you can have. So I think it's worth, and so it made a 5-day, actually might not have quite tested that 5-day, but it depends if it did on one of the other charts. Then it made a 4-day, and then it's run up off those. Those are the ones that I'm seeing the better moves on. And the ones on there that I've been doing on the 8 hours are a lot less reliable. And similarly, and I would say also these, but those with more history. I'm not sure about, look at the other ones that have gone off. Most people have gone off to the short side today, I think. What B did at the low. So even something like this, I can't remember what I had alerted here, whether it was like a daily or whether it's 3-day. Like some of them are going down deeper inside, but then coming up a lot higher, but then coming up after. But yeah, like really you want to be waiting because we've got such strong downtrends. Stick to the ones with history for longs and stick to the ones I would say ideally that have 3-day, 4-day, 5-day supply. Or if you want to take something like H, that's fine. You've got a tight stop, but it's not the highest probability. However, you take a bunch of them, one of them is probably going to perform. Let me show you light quickly because that was one of the ones we were looking at for the same. So yeah, you can see it's just died now. So this, not dissimilar to H that we were looking for. Okay, in this case, it took out the lows there, but for it to come up and test some of this untested large move, but you can see how long it took, and would have made it quite. I think. Remember, one of the other groups was trying to get into this, and would have made it quite hard to get into by dipping down here and then running later. But I think you got into this, didn't you? And then yeah, straight up into 12-hour supply. But now since then, the retest and that's just failed. So I'm just wondering whether some of these that have had these runs already are just going to be over. Let me have a look actually. Anchor is another more recent example. Yeah. So this I've been trying. So you can see this is a good example actually. So again, obviously it's had the massive pump. It could still come down lower to the start of this pump. I was looking, I think it was a 4-hour zone and then another 4-hour zone below. So yeah, I kind of gave the entry on that 4-hour, but then the aggressive retest. Once it's gone back up into supply, the aggressive retest note. Then I think there was an 8-hour, or maybe just there's an 8-hour here, and then the retest of that 3-monthly level, 2-monthly level. And it's still holding the 2-monthly level, but it's come back down deeper inside. But again, is it just going to take time, or is it going to be another one that's just going to die forever? As you can see, even back over here, they get some bounces. Then they can take, this is almost a year of consolidation before it decides to move again. But This one's slightly different. While it's got trend line stops on this, this has tested all the levels on the way down and now in that level there. So this actually doesn't really have as much of a reason to go back up as something like Light did. H has a better reason to go up than this. But yeah, anyway, anything else? Happy with that? It's back to B. B gone. No, I think we're all good. Okay, well, I'm glad the stream all went well. YouTube has a new function now that you can set the vertical stream to do it for you at the same time, rather than having to do it through my little add-on in OBS, which is a bonus because then maybe things will run faster and we'll get less technical difficulties. Yeah, so I need to investigate that. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. I won't commit because I have to see how tomorrow goes, but I will endeavour to maybe do an alt stream tomorrow and possibly maybe even be around for FOMC and see if I can be live at the time of FOMC. Well, actually, I think I might need to go out for dinner tomorrow night, so that might not work. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, and I shall see you again next time. Have a good night.